Right now, guys, we have another workshop starting right now. We've gone back to back to give you all these workshops. So I would like to introduce Nader from Lens, and he is going to be giving a workshop on Introduction to Full Stack Web3 Social with Lens Protocol and Next.js. Do we have Nader on the line?
Hi, can you hear me okay?
Yeah, we can hear you great. Great to have you here with us. I will let you take things away.
Okay, awesome. Okay, there we go. Just checking to make sure. It looks like I have my setup going good. Okay, perfect. Yeah, well, I'm excited to be here. I'm a big fan of pretty much all the different protocols that are involved with this hackathon. I think it's a really great opportunity for us to kind of build together and combine a lot of this stuff. And I think that Lens fits in really well with like almost any application, really, because you can kind of integrate social graphs in different ways that kind of will essentially add more, I would say, value to a lot of the applications that you might be building anyway. So I think Lens is hopefully going to be a way to add more value pretty easily, regardless of what you're building. So with this presentation, I'm hoping to kind of give you an overview of what Lens is, and then more importantly, how to actually get started building with it. So we don't have a ton of time, so I'm going to go ahead and get started. One thing I might recommend checking out that I will actually drop a link to here is an introduction to the Lens API. We're going to be using the Lens API a lot in this workshop, but there's also some cool stuff that I might not be covering that I did try to mention in this 90-second video that I just tweeted out. So I posted a link to that there, and I'm also going to post a link to the workshop materials as well. So I'll put both of those in the chat. And with that being said, I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. So this is going to be a quick introduction to the Lens protocol, and then we're going to dive into some code. My name is Nader Dabit. I'm a developer, an author, and a teacher. I've been writing code for a little over 10 years. I've been in blockchain for almost a little over a year and a half now. And currently I'm working with AAVE and Lens as the director of developer relations. I've been with them for a little over a month, but I've been building on Lens for almost 6 months. So what is Lens protocol? It's a composable and decentralized social graph. And when we think of a social graph, it's essentially just the type of application that enables these features that really a large majority of internet traffic is actually, when you think about it, being used on these types of applications, where you create some type of profile, you're able to view and follow other people within that application. You're able to publish content, and then other people can view a feed of content with your stuff in there, and you can view feeds of content with the people that you're following as well. And then typically one of the huge components is often a valuable recommendation algorithm. And that's very important because I think that the barrier that a lot of Web3 applications have had is that it's really tough to implement a decentralized or verifiable recommendation algorithm. And I think that's one of the areas that Lens really got right, is that they were able to do some interesting stuff that I would say blurs the line between almost like Web 2 and Web 3, that kind of gives you the censorship resistance of Web 3, along with a lot of the features and UX that you might want to have from a high quality application that we're used to in Web 2. Something like Twitter or TikTok isn't possible right now in a fully decentralized way because it's just not possible to build those types of recommendation algorithms, at least today. So what are some examples of social graph applications? These are a handful of them: Twitter, Facebook, YouTube, and TikTok. But when we think about it, often a lot of the applications that we use that we might not even think of as social graphs are social graph. So one example of that is Stack Overflow or even GitHub. When we sign up to GitHub, we can also follow other users. And there's actually a feed where you can kind of see what the activity of your friends are. So there are components of social graphs in so many different types of applications. And with the addition of XMTP and direct messaging within Lens recently, you also can kind of get direct messages and private encrypted messaging like out of the box, which is also a feature that a lot of applications want. So you can add like this social component to that. So what Lens like tries to solve are some of the downsides that we see today in social networks. So some of those downsides are, first of all, data and network are siloed and they have brittle and closed APIs. And from the perspective of a protocol, we're trying to solve that by offering a API that we know will always be there because it's built using Web3 primitives. When you build on something like Twitter's API, you can't wake up the next morning and assume that the API is going to continue to function the way it did before, because Twitter owns that API. That data is using a traditional database, meaning they can just change, delete, update data whenever they feel like it. They can change the API implementation whenever they feel like it. They can actually close it off whenever they feel like it. So therefore, you don't really typically see large companies, multi-million-dollar successful companies building on top of APIs as much as maybe you would have if we knew that there was immutability and like I would say a lot of the primitives that Web3 and blockchains bring to the table for implementing different front ends on top of these different social networks. So because the data network are siloed, because the APIs are closed and brittle, you just don't see like random people building a better Twitter client, because in the past, when that has happened, Twitter has decided to shut off those features because when the value is being drawn away from the platform, it's actually losing them money. And they care about the advertising model and their recommendation algorithm to drive all of that revenue via the advertising. Social networks today also are completely, you have no control over censorship. So if you're not doing anything wrong, you might be like, oh, well, that doesn't really matter. But in reality, it happens all the time. People have their YouTube account or their whatever accounts shut down, and literally, if someone hacks you, it can completely be erased. And with blockchain technologies, there is no idea of like erasure. It's permanent. So a couple of the value propositions you have are not only is there censorship resistance, but there's also permanence, meaning that if you upload something, it's always going to be there. And you might say that's a good or a bad thing, but it is a thing that comes with Web3. And then monetization is platform first for social networks today, meaning that like if Facebook has a user that has 10 million followers and that drives $1 million a day in revenue or whatever that number is, that Facebook user gets nothing. They don't get any of that money. All of that money goes directly to the platform. YouTube and TikTok are a little bit better about this, where more of that money actually goes to the users. Lens, though, is essentially the main difference I would say when we kind of like compare Lens to a traditional social network is that when you think of Twitter or Facebook or TikTok, you're thinking of the whole package. You have the front end and the back end. The back end is controlled by that company. It's a private API layer that's built specifically for their front end. But Lens is just an API and a protocol, meaning that we have focused on building out the back end and then incentivizing developers and people to build out their own front ends. So therefore, we have over a couple of hundred front ends that are now being built on top of Lens. And we're going to be building out, like I mentioned yesterday, some features within the protocol that allow front ends to monetize their usage. And we will be releasing more details about that sometime soon. But Lens is a set of smart contracts. It's deployed to Polygon, but anyone can actually fork these smart contracts and deploy them to any network that's EVM compatible. So if you want to deploy Lens to Polygon, you can actually do that. It only takes a couple of minutes. If you want to deploy Lens to Optimism or Arbitrum, wherever you can do that. But you can also leverage the existing network that's on Polygon by using our API layer. So we have a first-class developer-first API layer that's built using GraphQL. And with being able to control the API, there's a couple of features that we were able to, that the engineering team, I would say, was able to implement that offer a superior UX versus traditional blockchain applications. First of all, gasless transactions are something that's built into the API that enable anyone from around the world to literally just sign up and start using the app without needing to have any tokens. This is a huge, huge improvement for the accessibility, I would say, versus traditional apps that need tokens to interact with. So when you think of a DeFi protocol, if someone wants to use that, they need to find tokens. And for someone like that's watching this, it may seem kind of trivial because you obviously already probably have crypto or something in some way. But for the majority of people around the world, it's actually a very complicated process. And for people that are non-technical, it's even more complicated, you know? We take a lot of these things for granted. But with Lens, anyone can literally just download a wallet and start interacting with the protocol in a couple of minutes. They don't need to have any tokens at all. That's a huge, huge, I think, difference maybe than we've seen in the past for most applications. The developer-focused go-to-market is having to do with the fact that they've built out a really, really great GraphQL API that's really easy to use, not only for blockchain developers, but actually for traditional developers. There are only a couple of tens of thousands of quote unquote blockchain or Web3 developers based on a recent survey, but there are tens of millions of traditional developers. So being able to focus an API that is easy to consume by the average developer is extremely important. And therefore it's very approachable by traditional developers, opening the funnel for usage a lot bigger than what we've seen in the past. Also, there's this idea of a dispatcher that's been recently implemented into Lens. And what this allows you to do is to interact with Lens applications without having to sign every transaction. You sign once and you essentially are allowing that dispatcher to spend X amount of gas on behalf of you. And because we are able to implement a lot of, I would say, restrictions around what that means, like, oh, it's not like someone can send money from your wallet. Instead, they can, like or share or post or whatever on the behalf of that wallet without having to sign. But anything else beyond that is not allowed. You're kind of like having this nice compromise between good UX and security. So anyone can, after they've signed up with an application that has this dispatcher enabled, they can post, they can retweet, they can like, they can do whatever they want, and they don't have to continue to sign transactions. So it's more of a Web 2, like higher improvement around UX than what we've seen in the past. So with that being said, I'm going to actually jump around and take a quick look at the Lens API. The Lens API is built using GraphQL. And because it's built using GraphQL, there are a lot of great things that you can do with it. Instead of just hitting the contract with a query that's built in or some read operation that's built into the contract, you can actually do real queries, almost like you can from a database. So you can say, give me all of the publications that match this criteria. And you can say, I want the top commented posts, or I only want comments, and I want to limit it to 10. And then with GraphQL, you can also define what the response is. So you can say, I only want to get the profiles with the name and the bio, or I want the profile handle and the ID, or you can say, I want everything. So it's kind of completely up to you. It offers a lot of flexibility, but also offers the ability to build more, I would say, lower latency applications, which is important for mobile, because you're not having these large payloads being passed across the network. You can define exactly what you need for that view, and nothing less and nothing more. So to kind of give you an idea of what this Lens API looks like, we can actually go to the Lens docs and start testing it out. And this is a little bit of what I went over in that video. You can go to lens.xyz. We can click on Dev Garden here, and we can read the developer docs. And we can go down here to the API on the left-hand side. And here you see an introduction, and there's that video that I mentioned is embedded there. But all these different queries are available for us to test out. So for example, I might say I want to get publications, and I can go here and I have the query that is available here. So I can copy that to my clipboard. I can now go to api.lens.dev, I can paste that in here. And what I'm going to do is get the profile ID for myself, which I have to get from Linster. And I can just pass this here. I'm going to only get the posts. And here I see that I have all of this data coming back, which is really, really easy for me to do, just like that. And you can get all the different information about this publication. It looks like there's 26 upvotes, 4 comments, 12 collects, and 7 mirrors for that publication. I think that will be this one. So 4, 7, 26, and 12. It should be something close to that. Also, you can click over here into the docs, and you can see that all of the different queries and mutations are actually documented right here. So if I wanted to learn more about the query that we just ran, I can go to query.publications, and I can see that we have the arguments that can be passed in. So you see that we have the limit here, and we have the limit there. We have the profile ID, and here we have profile ID. So you can see all the different arguments that can be taken in here. And this is really helpful because, you know, when you're building your app, you can kind of get a good idea about all the different queries that you might need for different views of your app. So here I have a mobile app that I'm building right now using React Native. And when I go into my text editor, which I'll try to go ahead and open up real quick, you can see that I have this GraphQL query running. This is for getting the publications for a specific user. And when I click on a profile, I'm getting a certain view, and we have the comments, mirrors, collects, and likes. That's coming from this field here. But if I remove these stats, we see that, let's see here, actually. Okay, yeah. So when I remove these stats, you see that the actual buttons went away because I'm able to define what the view looks like just using the response coming back from GraphQL. So if I save this again and I add this back, then we'll see that those buttons actually come back because now we have the response coming back. So yeah, GraphQL is great. And since Lens API is built with GraphQL, then it's really, really easy to use, I would say. So with that being said, I'm going to try to show you how to build a quick application using Lens. And because we don't have a ton of time, we're probably not going to get too far, but at least we can build out one view, I think. So I'm going to go ahead and increase the font size here a little bit. So we're literally starting off with a brand new directory. And what I want to do is create a new Next.js application. This could be any like JavaScript client, like web application, but for me, I'm going to use Next.js. And I'll use npx create next app. And while that's creating, I'm going to go ahead and open this up in my text editor. And I might go ahead and run npm start. Or actually, npm run dev. And here we have a basic Next.js application. All right. So what we wanted to do is build out like a view that might be kind of similar to when you land on Leinster, where you might explore, or let's see here. Maybe I think we're going to get more of like a view where we're going to get different people in the app. So like a view of different profiles. So after we've created our app, we're going to install the dependencies, and you really need one major dependency when you're using Lens to get started. It's just going to be some GraphQL client. I would recommend either Urkel or Apollo. I'm starting to use Apollo more now, mainly because I've run into some limitations on Urkel around identity and authentication, but I've also run into some caching issues with Apollo. So I don't think it really matters all that much. But I would say either Urkel or Apollo might be the two that I would consider. And then I'm also going to install Ethers because we need a way to interact with the network by sending, posting transactions. And therefore, you need some type of like either Web3 or Ethers library. So I'm going to go ahead and install that. All right, while that's installing, I'm going to add some configuration that's Next.js specific, because we're going to be using something called Next Image. It requires you to define the origin of any images that are being used. So I'm just going to pass this array of domains into the next configuration. And this isn't really Lens specific, but I would say, let's see here. This is just more like Next.js specific. Okay, cool. So now we're going to go ahead and configure the API. And this is going to be API.js, where we end up talking to the GraphQL API. So there's a function or constructor or whatever you want to call it called create client from Urkel that we're going to import. And then we're going to go ahead and define the API URL, whatever you want to set that as. And this is going to be api.lens.dev. And then we can do this where we create a new client using create client. We can just pass an API URL. And then now we're really kind of ready to go. The only thing we need to do at this point is define a query. And then we can say, like, the data is coming back from client.query, passing in the query. So in order to do that, we need to define the query. So we'll create a new query that's going to be defined here. And this is going to be using the explore profiles query. And I can copy that to my clipboard. And here we're passing in a sort criteria, because you can actually, this is kind of one of the recommendation like algorithms, I guess you could say, where we're defining some type of like criteria, and the API is going to return us a response based on that. I think there are about 10 different sort criteria or you know, in that range, I think. And this will just bring us back the users with the most followers. And then the other query that we're going to need is we want to fetch publications for each user. And therefore, we're going to define a separate query for that. And it's going to be called get publications. And it's going to be using the publications query. And we actually looked at that one just a moment ago. So now we have two queries. One is get publications and one is explore profiles. And again, all of these queries are literally copy and paste out of our docs. So I'm kind of using a smaller version of this by minimizing the response a little bit, but you could literally just copy this. You could paste it like this, and it would still work. You might just prune the response data to kind of match what you actually need. All right, so with that being said, Our app should still be working. Okay, good. And now we want to update our view to actually use this new API that we just created. So I can go to pages/index.js, and I'm going to go ahead and just delete everything. And the first thing we're going to import is use state and use effect from React. Use state allows us to maintain local state, and use effect allows us to make function calls or HTTP requests when the app loads. And then we also want to create a function called fetch, I guess, profiles. And then this is going to be the function that we use to call our API. And to call our API, we're going to go ahead and import clients. And let's see here. I guess explore profiles. From our API. And then we can call the use effect hook. And this is just going to be called when the app loads. And we can call fetch profiles. And then here we can actually define the query that we can go ahead and actually execute the query that we defined already. So I can just do like a try catch block. And we'll go ahead and console.log this data. So we're going to call the API by saying client.query, passing in the explore profiles, and we're going to say .toPromise, and then we're going to log that out. And right now we're just going to say hello world to kind of show something on the in the UI. So if I go back here and I open the inspector, we can see if our response was successful. And here we see that we have the data returned from our API. So we have explore profiles.items. The items is the items array that we're going to be working with. And here you can see that we have an array of profiles that came back. So here's Stanley right here. I believe this response is the same one I was using in that mobile app a moment ago. So we have Web3 Academy, Lens, Yogi, and Linster, and this in the same order. So you kind of see how we might build out a view using that response data. So with that being said, I'm going to go back here and I'm going to actually go ahead and copy this a larger snippet of code for index.js that just expands what we did here and actually stores that in the state by doing something like and then whenever this data comes back, we can call like set profiles. And then we can say something like data.explore profiles.items. And then just to kind of give you a quick look at like how basic this is, I'm just going to create a simple view and then we're going to update it with a more detailed view. But I can say profiles.map. And then at the very least, we can say just to spit out the profile.handle. And then hopefully we should see a list of handles. And there we go. We have all of the handles that came back from the API. But to make that a little bit better, we're just going to add this additional code here. And we're doing the same thing that we did earlier, profiles.map, but instead of just showing their handle, we're also showing their picture and their their latest publication. And it looks like I have an image source that isn't been lens infura-ipfs.io. Maybe I need to restart the server. There we go. So now we see that we have the profile handle, their profile image, and then their latest post. And with that being said, the next step is going to be able to navigate and view the details of the profile along with more of their actual posts. So if you want to continue the workshop, that is all documented here, and everything should be copy and paste, and it should all work exactly as expected. And with that being said, I'll go ahead and stop sharing my screen because I think we're at time to go ahead and start taking questions.
Thank you very much, Nader, for that great presentation. Yes, we have 10 minutes for Q&A, so feel free to drop your questions in the chat or raise your hand and ask one live. While people are formulating their questions, I can get us started. My one would be, if you were building on Lens as a participant in the hackathon, what would you personally build?
No, that's a good question. There's like quite a bit of stuff that you can build. You can actually go to lens.xyz and go to the developer garden by clicking on Dev Garden, and you'll see that we have two areas that can probably help you with that question. One is apps to kind of see what other people are already building. And then we also have an ideas section that kind of gives you more visibility into some of the general like ideas around inspiration that you could build. I think that you could literally look at any existing Web 2 application that exists today that's popular and kind of think about, oh, it would be cool if there was a Web 3 version of this. And if it doesn't exist, or even if it does exist and it's not that good, then you might consider creating it. So a good example of that would be possibly having like a hybrid like publication platform that implements both something like content, writing content, I would say like Medium or something like that, or Mirror, but also that implements like live video and actually just video. So, if I wanted to create like a blog post on Mirror or something like that, and I wanted to have like video integration or something like that, that might be kind of cool. So, but yeah, if you can go to lens.xyz, go to the developer garden, you can see ideas as well as existing apps.
Awesome, thank you very much. I see we have a couple of questions in the chat. First one, how do we get Lens profile or multiple?
So you can build without a Lens profile, but we are already, I think I mentioned, I am, and we are happy to allow list any person that's part of this hackathon for a Lens profile. I don't know the most proper way of going about doing that, but maybe I can talk offline with you or with someone else from the hackathon. But yeah, anyone that's here, we would love to get you a Lens profile. So there's kind of like currently a allow list because it's still in beta and we're not trying to open the doors for everyone quite yet. But if you're in this hackathon, we would love to have you. So we'll figure that out. But yeah, just hold tight on that and we can get it done hopefully soon.
Awesome. And one more question in the chat. Is it possible to query video content data like what's on LensTube?
And by the way, back to that previous question, it would just be a single lens profile, not multiple, but we would be able to do one per user. Is it possible to query video content data like what's on LensTube? Yeah, absolutely. There's different metadata that you can tag when you upload something. So you can say, oh, this is an image, this is a video, this is text. And then when you query for that data, you can create views on the data based on the type of content that you want returned. So you might say, I only want videos to be returned. And therefore, when you see something like LensTube, that's the query that they're sending, and they're only returning the video content. If you create a publishing platform that's only text, then you might say, I only want text being returned. If you want everything, you could just return everything. So yeah, you can kind of define exactly the return data that you would like to be had.
Awesome. There's another one in the chat there. How would you also build a video content social apps on Lens?
How would I build a video content social app on Lens? I mean, just provide them, I guess, with a great user experience for creating. I think that having a good UX is like a huge part of like any application, even if it does, like there's applications that barely do anything, but the UX is so good that people really like using them. So if you can kind of come up with a way to provide a nice, beautiful user experience and design, then you're kind of like a lot of the way there. And then from there, just tie in the existing social graph that's already there. You can recommend people to follow based on maybe the number of videos that they've created or something like that. But yeah, I would just say providing a good user experience would be the very first place I would start.
Sure, thanks. And one more from me. For people trying Lens for the first time, what top tips can you give people to get up to speed quickly?
I would say, first of all, going to the API docs and checking out the API Explorer like we did earlier and messing around with a couple of queries. Second would be to go back to that workshop that we just did and actually implement a query yourself that would kind of like give you a very good idea around how this all fits together, And then the third thing I would do is that in order to post to the network, you typically need to be authenticated. And we just released a really nice, I think, fairly easy to get up and running authentication guide. And you should be able to get authentication up and running in maybe a few minutes. And I'm hoping to create a video on that kind of shows exactly what that looks like. But that tutorial actually shows everything step by step. All should be copy and paste. So that would be the first three things I would do. Check out the api.lens.dev, try out some queries from the docs. Second would be to build out a really basic app. And then third would be to look into how to authenticate.
Thanks, that's really helpful. And guys, last chance to put any final questions in the chat as we are approaching time. Just give you 10 more seconds for any final questions. If not, I think, one more question. Thank you, Post to help. Yeah, thanks again for coming in. I think we'll wrap things up there, Nader. That was a really, really insightful presentation, and I'm sure you've inspired people to integrate Lens in the hackathon. So thanks for coming in. And are there any sort of last comments you'd like to make regarding the hackathon and Lens?
I think that's it. I mean, I would say definitely keep an eye out for how we're going to get you all allow listed for Lens handles if you don't already have one. And hopefully, once you have that, actually check out a couple of Lens apps that are existing. One of them is Lenster. That's the web entry point that a lot of people use. It's built by a community member. It's pretty cool. Check out Orb, which is a mobile app. And then once you kind of have used other apps, you might get a good idea around what you might build yourself.
Awesome. Well, thank you for coming in, and I think we'll wrap things up there. So everyone have a good evening, and we hope you start building in the Livepeer Next Viewable Hackathon. Have a good evening, everyone. Goodbye.
Bye. Thanks.
Thank you.